The folder sat between them like a loaded gun nobody had fired yet. She had signed contracts into existence with less paper than this. Now she would sign one out of it. He kept saying her name like it still belonged to him. Naomi, Naomi, listen. But she wasn't listening anymore. She was reading. 2 years ago, she had begged a stranger on his behalf. Today, the stranger's badge was clipped to her own blazer. He didn't know that part yet. He was about to. 2 years earlier, rain in Atlanta didn't fall so much as it arrived. All at once, like it had somewhere better to be, and was only stopping through. Naomi Grant stood under the bus shelter on Cascade Road with a stack of graded worksheets pressed to her chest to keep them dry. And she did the math, the way she always did math, fast, silent, without needing paper. Bus fare, tutoring money, the light bill that was 4 days late. It came out even, barely. It always came out even, barely. That was the whole architecture of her life. She wasn't thinking about Daniel when she got home, but he was there anyway, at the kitchen table, staring at a spreadsheet he didn't understand with the specific stillness of a man trying not to look defeated in front of his wife. Daniel Cross had a folder of rejected bids beside his laptop, and he closed the laptop when she walked in, too quickly, the way you close a door on a smell. "You didn't eat," she said. "Not a question. I was waiting on you. You were waiting on the pot to cook itself." Mostly that. He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to sunlight the apartment had seen all day. She put the worksheets down and opened the refrigerator, and in the small yellow light of it she ran the numbers again, out loud this time, the way she'd done since they were newlyweds rent, the bookkeeping client who paid net 30, the tutoring hours she picked up after her actual job at a downtown accounting firm where she was, officially, nobody in particular. Daniel listened to her, recite it the way other men listened to weather reports, half comfort, half dread. "One day," he said, "you won't have to do all this. One day I'll still do it. I'll just do it in a bigger kitchen." He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in a week, and for a moment the apartment felt like enough. What Daniel didn't know, because she had never told him, was that she had already mentioned his company's name to someone who mattered. Naomi kept books for a small subcontractor who did drywall for Meridian Construction Group, one of the largest developers in the Southeast, and 3 weeks earlier, in the margins of an invoice meeting, she had slid Daniel Cross Development's profile across the table to a procurement manager named Renee Walsh, a woman Naomi had once saved from a 6-figure reconciliation error nobody else caught. "He's good," Naomi had said. "He just hasn't had the room to prove it." She hadn't told Daniel because she didn't want his hope resting on a favor. She wanted it to feel earned when it came, if it came at all. At the community center where she tutored on Tuesdays, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Odom watched Naomi work through a teenager's algebra homework with the patient exactness of someone balancing a ledger and said, "Not for the first time, you know you could be running something, don't you?" Instead of fixing everyone else's numbers for pocket change, Naomi only smiled and corrected the next equation. Mrs. Odom shook her head and said nothing else. But she watched Naomi leave that night with the particular concern of a woman who has seen talent go unpaid before and knows exactly what it costs the person carrying it. The call came on a Thursday, while Naomi was standing in a stranger's kitchen counting out $15 in cash for 2 hours of algebra. Daniel's voice on the other end didn't sound like his voice. "Ngozi, I mean. Naomi, you're not going to believe this. Try me. Meridian, the Ashcroft Commons project. They want to meet with me. Full site package, 9 buildings." She let the silence sit for 1 second longer than it needed to, because some part of her wanted to hear him say it twice before she let herself believe it belonged to them. "When?" she said. "Monday. Naomi, if this goes through, then it goes through because you're good. Not because of luck." She meant it as encouragement. She did not mention Renee Walsh. She never would, not out loud, not even years later when it would have mattered to say it. Daniel got the contract. $9.6 million. A mixed-use development off the Beltline. The kind of project that turned unknown contractors into names people said with respect in rooms Naomi had never been allowed inside. The mobilization payment landed in Cross Development's account 3 weeks later, $3.8 million, released up front to cover materials, equipment, and labor before the real work began. Daniel called her from the bank parking lot, and this time when he laughed, it didn't sound like relief. It sounded like something had come loose. That night, he took her to a restaurant with white tablecloths and prices that weren't printed on the menu, and a waiter who called him sir 3 times in one sentence, and Daniel ordered a bottle of wine neither of them knew how to pronounce. Naomi watched him hold the stem of the wine glass the way he used to hold a level on a job site carefully, like it mattered whether it was even. She should have felt only joy. Instead, she felt the particular unease of watching a man discover a version of himself he liked better than the one she married. "To bigger things," he said, lifting his glass. "To the project," she said, lifting hers. "The money is only the beginning. The project is what changes things." He laughed at that too, softer this time, like it was a nice thing to say rather than a thing to actually do. Money did not arrive quietly into their apartment. It arrived the way weather arrived, all at once, rearranging the furniture of their life before either of them had agreed to the new floor plan. Within a month, Daniel had leased an SUV he didn't need for a job site he could reach in his old truck. And within 2, he'd stopped asking Naomi to check his invoices, which she noticed because checking invoices had been, for 6 years, the one thing he trusted her with completely. "I've got a project accountant now," he told her, not quite meeting her eyes. "You don't have to do that anymore. I don't mind doing it. I know. You just don't have to." It wasn't the sentence that bothered her. It was the relief underneath it, the specific relief of a man closing a door he used to leave open. At the site trailer, a project manager named Marcus Cole, an old engineering school classmate of Naomi's whom Daniel had hired on Renee's recommendation without knowing the 2 women had ever met, began noticing things he didn't like. Invoices from vendors that weren't on Meridian's approved supplier list. A concrete order changed at the last minute to a cheaper mix. Marcus mentioned it once, carefully. "The way you mention something to a man who signs your paycheck." "We're using equivalent materials," Daniel said. "Cheaper doesn't mean worse." "Equivalent according to whom?" "According to the budget, Marcus." Marcus didn't push. He wrote it down instead, in the quiet, deliberate way of a man who has learned that some fires are better documented than fought. And he did not mention it to Naomi, because it wasn't his place, and because some part of him, a part he wasn't proud of, still remembered exactly how she'd smiled at him in a computer lab 11 years earlier, before either of them had married anyone at all. The woman's name was Vanessa Hale, and she worked events for a firm that catered groundbreaking ceremonies, which was how she came to be standing beside Daniel at the Ashcroft Commons ribbon cutting, laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his forearm, 1 second longer than a stranger's hand should rest anywhere. Naomi wasn't there to see it. A co-worker was, a woman named nobody in particular from the accounting firm, who mentioned it to someone else, who mentioned it to a cousin, who eventually, 3 weeks later, mentioned it to Naomi over lunch with the careful cruelty of someone delivering news they've been sitting on. "I'm sure it's nothing," the cousin said, which is what people say right before they hand you something. Naomi didn't confront him that night. She watched him instead, the way she'd learned to watch a column of numbers that didn't add up, not with panic, but with the patient attention of someone waiting for the error to repeat itself so she could locate exactly where it lived. She noticed he'd started coming home at 11, at midnight, always with a reason, always with the specific fluency of a man who has rehearsed his alibi in the car. "Where were you?" "Out with the big boys. Networking." "Until midnight." "Naomi, you worry too much. I'm only telling you to be more focused. I know who I am. I hope the version people are talking about is the one you want them to see." He didn't answer that. He picked up his phone instead, and in the blue light of the screen, his face did something she recognized, not guilt, exactly, but the specific stillness of a man deciding whether a lie is worth the effort of telling it well. At the site, Marcus watched the supply invoices climb, and the receipts for Daniel's personal spending climb faster, and though he said nothing to Naomi, He began, quietly, keeping a folder of his own. He didn't know yet what it was for. He only knew, the way careful men often know things before they can explain them, that someone was going to need it eventually. The confrontation didn't start as a confrontation. It started with Naomi picking up his phone to silence an alarm and seeing a name light up the screen mid-message, Vanessa, followed by 3 words she didn't need context to understand. Who is she? A friend. A friend who says that? You're reading into things. I read for a living, Daniel. It's the one thing I'm actually good at. Don't start. I saw the message. So what? Nothing happened. You don't hold hands with nothing. He stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor, and for a moment neither of them said anything. And in that silence, Naomi understood something she would spend the next year trying to unknow, that the man across from her had already left, weeks ago, in every way that mattered except the one where he still slept in her bed. You've changed, he said, like it was an accusation instead of a confession. No, she said. You have. Look around this apartment and tell me who's still standing in it. He didn't answer. He picked his keys up off the counter and walked out into the rain without an umbrella, which felt, to Naomi, like the truest thing he'd done all week, leaving without protection, the same way he'd once arrived. She sat at the kitchen table long after he was gone, running numbers that had nothing to do with money. 6 years married, 3 jobs at once, most of that time. One man who used to hold a level like it mattered whether things were even. She did not cry, not yet. She did the thing she always did, when a column wouldn't balance. She went back to the beginning and checked every line, looking for the exact place the error had first appeared, certain that if she found it, she would understand not just what had happened, but whether any of it had ever been real at all. He came home at 2 in the morning, smelling like a party he hadn't invited her to, and Naomi was awake on the couch, not because she'd planned an ambush, but because sleep had stopped coming easily months ago. He looked at her the way you look at a bill you forgot was due. We need to talk, she said. Not tonight. Then when, Daniel? You tell me when, because I've been asking for a date on this conversation since October. You don't fit into my life anymore. He said it fast, like ripping tape off a wound, like speed could make it hurt less for either of them. You don't fit this circle. I need you to understand that isn't about you being less than. It's a different world now. I built the floor you're standing on. You built a floor for a man who doesn't live here anymore. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a sentence like that, and Naomi sat inside it for exactly as long as it took to realize he meant every word. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She stood up, walked to the bedroom, and began folding clothes into a bag with the same steady hands she used to balance a ledger at midnight. Because some skills, it turns out, transfer to grief without asking permission. Where will you even go? He said, and there was something almost like concern in it which made it worse, not better. Somewhere that isn't a different world, she said, and left. She called Renee at 11:40 at night, and Renee didn't ask questions before she said come, which is the particular gift of a friendship built on more than convenience. Naomi stood on the curb outside the apartment building with a duffel bag and a stack of tutoring worksheets she'd grabbed on instinct, because some part of her, even in that moment, refused to leave behind the one thing that had always been hers alone. You're freezing, Renee said, pulling her inside. I didn't know who else to call. You called the right person. Now eat something before you talk, because I refuse to let you cry on an empty stomach. It's bad for the story, and it's bad for your blood sugar. Naomi almost laughed, which surprised her more than the crying would have. For 3 weeks she slept on Renee's pull-out couch and worked her 2 jobs and said nothing to her mother, because her mother had warned her, years ago, in a voice sharp with fear dressed up as anger, marriage is not campus love, it is bills and hunger and relatives and tears. And Naomi wasn't ready to hand her mother the satisfaction of having been right, even though being right had never once made her mother happy about it. It was Renee who mentioned the opening at Meridian, almost in passing, over coffee. They're building out a whole compliance division, project director role, financial oversight, procurement audits, the whole thing. You'd be perfect and you know it. I don't have the credentials for something like that. You have 6 years of catching other people's mistakes for free. That's not nothing, Naomi. That's a resume. Naomi almost said no out loud, the way she'd said no to bigger things her whole life, out of a caution that had kept her safe and small in equal measure. Instead, she said, "Send me the listing," and something in her chest moved for the first time, in weeks. Not hope, exactly, but its quieter cousin, the willingness to try. The interview took place on the 40th floor of a glass building downtown, and Naomi wore the one blazer she owned that didn't have a coffee stain somewhere on the sleeve. 3 people sat across from her, and one of them was Renee, who gave her the smallest, steadiest nod before the questions began. "Your academic record is outstanding," the panel lead said, "and your work history shows discipline most people your age haven't developed yet. Financial intelligence, attention to procurement risk. We'd like to offer you the role of Project Director of Compliance." "I don't know if I can do this," Naomi said, and meant it. "You worked 3 jobs, managed bills, supported a household on nothing, handled pressure and still stayed kind about it. That isn't nothing. That's leadership without a salary attached. What if I fail?" "Then fail while being paid properly for once. You've suffered for free long enough." She said yes before she let herself think too hard about it, and walked out of that building into October sunlight feeling, for the first time in months, like a woman standing on ground she had built herself, rather than ground someone else had let her borrow. Her first week, she caught a $12 million variance in a project's materials budget within 2 days, simply by doing what she'd always done, reading every line until the error had nowhere left to hide. Her new assistant, a nervous young man named Nobody Worth Naming Yet, told a colleague afterward, "She smiles soft, but she calculates like the IRS." And it traveled through the office by the end of the week as the kind of compliment people give when they mean it as a warning to themselves. 3 months into the job, a project file crossed her desk with a company name she recognized before she'd even opened the folder. Cross Development LLC, Ashcroft Commons. She sat with her hand on the cover for a long moment, the way you sit with your hand on a door you already know what's behind. She hadn't spoken to Daniel since the night she left. She'd heard things, secondhand, the way you hear things about a life you used to live: a new SUV, a rented apartment in a building with a doorman, a name that wasn't hers, appearing beside his in captions. She scrolled past without letting herself read twice. None of it had prepared her for the specific vertigo of seeing his company's letterhead under her own department stamp. She could have recused herself. The compliance manual had a clause for exactly this conflict of interest: prior relationship, request reassignment. She read the clause twice. Then she thought of Marcus's careful, half-finished notes that had somehow found their way, through channels she didn't fully understand, into the flagged review queue months before her name was ever attached to the file. Somebody had already been documenting something. The question wasn't whether there was a problem. The question was whether she was willing to be the one who found it honestly, instead of stepping aside and letting someone else decide what honesty required. She picked up her phone and told her supervisor she was ready to lead the site audit personally. "You're certain," he said. "You know this contractor." "I know his work," she said. "I don't know anymore what he's built it out of." She did not tell him the rest, that 6 years of watching a man's hands on a level had taught her exactly what steadiness looked like, and exactly what it looked like when it started to shake. She closed the folder, and for the first time since the divorce papers, allowed herself to feel something that wasn't grief. It felt, uncomfortably, like the beginning of an answer she hadn't known she was still waiting for. The audit team arrived at the Ashcroft Commons site trailer on a Tuesday morning that Daniel had circled in red on a calendar for 2 weeks, certain he had until Friday. Naomi walked in first, in a navy blazer with a laminated badge clipped to the lapel, and Daniel's face did something she recognized from 11 years of marriage, the particular collapse of a man who has just watched his last excuse walk through the door wearing his ex-wife's face. "Naomi." He said it like a question he already knew the answer to. "Mr. Cross," she said, and the formality landed harder than any insult could have. "We're here to review procurement records and material compliance for the current phase. There's no need for that. Everything here is standard. Then the review will be quick." Marcus, standing near the supply shed with a folder under his arm he'd been carrying, in one form or another, for the better part of a year, met her eyes across the trailer and gave the smallest nod. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He handed the folder to the lead auditor instead, and watched Daniel's jaw tighten in the specific way of a man watching a door close that he had genuinely believed, until that exact second would stay open for him forever. The invoices told a story faster than any person could have. Materials purchased after the mobilization payment cleared from vendors who had never appeared on Meridian's approved supplier list. Concrete test results filed weeks late, showing compressive strength below the contract's minimum requirement. Steel reinforcement sourced through a distributor with no registration on file anywhere in the state database. "This isn't a rounding error," Naomi said, laying the documents across the table one at a time, each one landing with the quiet finality of a verdict. "This is a pattern." "I authorized alternative materials," Daniel said. "That's not the same as fraud." "Alternative isn't the word for materials that fail structural testing, Daniel. The word for that is dangerous. Nothing has failed yet." "That's not the same as nothing being wrong." She looked up at him then, and for a moment the room fell away, the auditors, Marcus, the trailer, all of it, and it was just the two of them, the way it used to be at a kitchen table with a spreadsheet neither of them fully understood, except this time she understood everything, and he understood that she did. "You did this," he said quietly. "You came here to destroy me." "No," she said, and her voice didn't rise, because she had learned, a long time ago, in a different kitchen, that the strongest thing a person could do in a room like this was refuse to match the volume of someone drowning. "I came here to do my job. You did this the day you decided cheaper concrete was worth the risk to the people who live in these buildings. I only opened the folder. You filled it." A junior engineer standing by the door, a nervous young woman who had documented 3 of Daniel's material substitutions over the past 6 months, out of a sense of professional dread she couldn't quite name, spoke up for the first time. "I have the emails," she said. "Instructions to use the alternate vendor. I can forward them to compliance immediately." "Don't," Daniel started. But the sentence had nowhere left to go, and everyone in the room, including him, seemed to understand that at the same moment. Meridian's compliance review recommended immediate suspension of the contract, pending legal determination, and the formal hearing took place 8 days later in a conference room with better lighting than the trailer and none of its mercy. Daniel sat across from a panel that included the project's legal counsel, Meridian's regional director, and Naomi, whose presence he had clearly hoped, against all reason, would work in his favor. "Did you authorize the use of materials below the contract's specified standard?" the counsel asked. "I authorized alternatives. There were delays with the approved suppliers." "Was a variation request submitted for those alternatives?" Silence. "Were you aware," the counsel continued, "that the substitution exposed the structure to compromised load-bearing risk?" "I was told it would hold." "Told by whom?" More silence. Longer this time. The kind that answers a question all on its own. "Effective immediately," the regional director said, "Cross Development's contract with Meridian is terminated, and the company will be required to submit a full accounting of remaining project funds, including repayment of the mobilization advance in the event of non-completion." "How much?" Daniel said, and his voice had lost the confidence Naomi remembered from a wine list 2 years earlier. $3.8 million, the counsel said, "in full, or through a structured repayment plan, pending review." Daniel didn't look at Naomi as he left the room, which she understood, because she wouldn't have wanted to be looked at either if their positions were reversed. What she felt, walking out afterward into a hallway of fluorescent light, wasn't triumph. It surprised her how little triumph there was in it at all. Mostly what she felt was the specific, quiet weight of having told the truth about someone she had once loved enough to build an entire life around, and having the truth turn out to matter more than the love had. She thought, briefly, of a message she'd sent Renee 3 years earlier. Before any of this, he's good, he just hasn't had the room to prove it, and understood now, standing in that hallway, that she had been right about the man. She simply hadn't accounted for what room, once given, could do to someone who had never learned what to do with it besides take up too much of it. Vanessa left within the month, not out of loyalty tested and found wanting, but out of the specific arithmetic of a woman who had never signed on for a man without money attached to him. She didn't say it cruelly. She simply packed 2 suitcases and said something about needing peace of mind that landed to anyone who'd known Daniel a year earlier, like an old joke told badly. Daniel moved into a single room above a laundromat on the west side, the kind of apartment where the ceiling fan complained more than it cooled, and began the long, humiliating work of repayment, $3,000 a month for a debt that would take years to close, deducted automatically before he saw a cent of whatever smaller jobs he could still find. His mother took him in for a while when even that room became too much, and told him, without softness, "I must thank the woman who stood by you when we failed to. You threw away gold with your own hand, and knowledge like that travels, whether you want it to or not." Naomi heard about the collapse, the way she heard most things about her old life now, secondhand, distant, no longer able to reach the parts of her it once would have wounded. She did not celebrate it. She noticed, with something like surprise, that she didn't need to. Her mother called in November, after nearly a year of silence between them, and asked to see her. Naomi almost said no. She thought of every warning her mother had given her before the wedding, every prediction that had turned out, infuriatingly, to be accurate, and wondered whether forgiveness in that direction would feel like healing, or like surrender. "I was wrong," her mother said, when Naomi finally sat across from her at the kitchen table where Naomi had once done homework as a girl. "I thought money was the only thing that could keep you safe. I thought if you married someone with nothing, you'd chosen a life of pain. When your marriage ended, I felt insulted before I let myself feel worried. I forgot you weren't a decision I'd made. You were my daughter." "I needed you," Naomi said, and it was the first time she'd said it out loud to anyone, including herself. "I know. Shame kept me away longer than it should have. I'm asking you to forgive an old woman's pride." Naomi reached across the table and took her mother's hand, not because every wound had closed, but because some repairs begin with a single beam set straight, long before the rest of the structure is sound. "I forgive you," she said. "I'm still learning what that means day to day, but I forgive you." Marcus asked her to dinner 4 months later, at a restaurant far quieter than the one Daniel had once taken her to, and he did not lift a wine glass like it was a trophy. He asked about her work, listened to the answer without checking his phone, and told her, near the end of the meal, that he had admired her since a computer lab 11 years earlier and had never quite stopped, even when admiring her from a distance was the only option available to him. "I'm not asking to rescue you," he said. "You're not lost. I'm asking to walk beside whatever you're building next. I don't know if I'm ready to be anyone's wife again. Then I'll ask again when you are. I'm not in a hurry. I've already waited 11 years. A few more won't kill me." She laughed, and it surprised her how easy it was, how little it cost her. They married the following autumn in a small ceremony that Naomi's father walked her toward with his hand shaking slightly, not from age, but from the specific grief of a man who had missed her first wedding entirely and understood exactly what he'd forfeited by staying away. "I missed the first one," he told her quietly, before the doors opened. "I won't miss this one. Forgive an old man's pride." "I already have," she said. "Now walk me down the aisle before I change my mind about the shoes." Daniel came to the wedding uninvited, and stood outside the reception hall long enough for a groomsman to notice him and ask, carefully, if he needed help. He only wanted to leave something for the bride, he said, not trouble, just an apology, 4 years overdue and smaller than it should have been. Inside the envelope was a single line. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too proud to see it while it was still mine to keep." Naomi read it once, standing near the gift table in a dress that had taken 3 fittings to feel right, and felt something pass through her that wasn't anger and wasn't tenderness either. Something closer to the quiet, final weight of closing a ledger that had stayed open far too long. "You don't want to go out and talk to him?" Marcus asked. Not as a challenge, just a question, the kind a secure man can afford to ask. "No," she said. "My happiness doesn't need his shadow standing near it, not even for a minute." She folded the note once and set it down, and when she turned back toward the room full of people who had chosen, this time, to stand where they belonged, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel on a day so full of noise, a kind of stillness, the specific, hard-won stillness of a woman who had finally stopped waiting for anyone's apology to complete her. 6 months into the marriage, Naomi used part of her signing bonus from Meridian to fund a small scholarship at the community center where she used to tutor for $15 an hour, earmarked for adults returning to school for accounting and finance degrees. Mrs. Odom cried at the announcement dinner and told anyone who'd listen that she'd said it years ago that girl was always running something, she just hadn't been given the room to prove it yet. The first recipient was a single mother working 2 jobs, the same kind of arithmetic Naomi had once done under a bus shelter in the rain, and when Naomi shook her hand, she recognized, without needing to say it out loud, exactly what she was looking at. I keep thinking about that moment when Naomi almost recused herself from the audit, how easy it would have been to walk away and let someone else carry the truth. She didn't need the confrontation. She needed the honesty more than she needed the closure. What stays with me isn't the fraud getting exposed, it's that scholarship at the end, built from money she earned by finally being seen. Would you have taken that audit, knowing exactly whose name was on the file? I'd genuinely love to hear what you would have done in her position, down in the comments.